This is a recording of Arthur O. Kapp, K-A-P-P, of 2224 Bel Air Drive in Lansing, Michigan, 48911. Art's phone number is area code 517-487-0239. The recording was made by Jim Walkinshaw of the Oldsmobile History Center on May 8, 1989 at the History Center on 4000 North Grand River in Lansing. This is tape number 1 of 2 tapes. Well, Art, maybe you could start, if you would, with your name and your address and your phone number, please.
My name is Arthur O. Kapp, that's K-A-P-P, and my address is 2224 Bel Air Drive, Lansing, zip code 48911, and my phone number is 487-0239.
Okay. Then maybe if you would, Art, just take us back to when you started at the plant and what you were doing.
I started at Oldsmobile in September of 1940, and I was working with U.S. Rubber at the time, and I applied through Mr. Griffin, who was the head of distribution at that time, and I contacted him on tires and things that I was working on. And he asked me one time why I didn't apply to Oldsmobile, that he might at some future date want me to work for him in his office. And we had frequent contacts. And one time he told me that they were getting a new general manager at Oldsmobile, Charity Skinner.
Okay.
And from Turnstead Division in Detroit, and wondered, he told me that they were having trouble finding someone that was a good driver and could drive high speed, which I'd had experience in, and someone that could drive him at any time. And if I would be interested in that, I could take the job, and later on, I could get a transfer in his department.
Okay.
I started working for Mr. Skinner. I thought I liked that type of work and meet a lot of people, friendly contacts. And Mr. Skinner and I got along very well right from the start. He had 2 young boys, about, I think about 11 or 12 years old at that time, twins. And I became very close to the 2 boys because I have 2 boys around that age.
Uh-huh.
And my job at the time was to drive him to the airport, do any driving that he requested, drive his secretary to Detroit or wherever. And he informed me that when we started that he needed someone that wasn't afraid of speed. And I told him I wasn't. And we used to make the GM building, which we went down quite frequently. We would leave his home in East Lansing at, say, 8 o'clock, and we would be at the GM building at 9:30. An hour and a half on the old road.
The old road, too.
Going through Williamston, Weberville, Fowlerville,
yeah.
Brighton. I know them all by heart yet. And it meant long hours.
I assume you had to wait for him.
I waited, and sometimes after we were in Detroit, meetings sometimes lasted long. And sometimes after a few years, we got to be quite good friends. if we happened to be in Detroit and he was there all afternoon, he would say, "Why don't you go to the ball game?"
Okay.
And he said, "I'm sure you can find tickets." Well, it didn't take me long to find some of the other drivers there from Buick, Chevrolet, and Pontiac and so forth. And they informed me that Campbell Ewald had a box behind third base, Tiger Stadium. I believe it was Brick Stadium at that time.
Yeah, they were our advertising agent, weren't they? The
Yes,
Campbell Ewald.
for Chevrolet. For Chevrolet. And so all it was needed is to go up and see the secretary, and she would give you the ticket to get in. And many times you were the only one in the box. And then he would tell me, "If you're late, why, I'll get someone drive me down to Detroit Athletic Club for dinner." And meet him there at specified time, whatever it was. It worked out well. And I might add a little humor to this at this stage. One time we didn't get home till about 1:30. And my wife said, "Well, you're real late this time and you look awfully tired." And I said, "Well, it is tiresome sitting in Tiger Stadium all afternoon watching the ball game." She didn't laugh.
No, I can imagine she probably had a few words for that. Did you have to drive other folks?
I drove whoever he requested.
Okay.
And I drove quite a few military people at the time that were coming in. And General Lucius Clay was one of his best friends.
Isn't that interesting?
And when he retired and went to Cape Cod, he built a beautiful home in Cape Cod. And General Clay was his neighbor right to maybe 50 or 75 feet away. Their lots adjoined. And he had a beautiful home there. And that was in Chatham. Chatham, Cape.
What kind of a man was Mr. Skinner?
Mr. Skinner was the finest man I ever met and one of my best friends.
How did he?
Mr. Skinner was a very hard man to work for unless you were fair with him and did a good job. And he was the easiest man in the world to work for if you did that. In my book, he made Oldsmobile because Oldsmobile was getting very low when Mr. Skinner came here.
Did he have a sense of humor?
Oh, yes, yes. Very well educated. He was in the submarine service during World War I. And he was very interested when the submarine sank out from Massachusetts. I forget the name of it now. But he made a trip down there at the time that had sunken. But getting back to the business at hand, we worked long hours, but on the way to Detroit, he sorted all of it. He worked constantly in the car, and he would sort all of his papers and throw the junk stuff in the back.
He rode in the front seat?
He rode in the front seat always. I could be going 90, 95 miles an hour, and if I applied the brakes, he very seldom looked up. He might look up to see whether there's an emergency or not. When you're going that fast, you apply the brakes quite a few times.
Especially on the 2-lane roads.
Right. One time I think it was 3-lane, was it not?
That's true. That's old 16 was 3-lane.
Old 16.
Right.
One time and on the paper deal, he would mark B on them. That meant I was to take it back to the office to Betty Dakin, Betty Hammer. And she went by the name of Hammer at Oldsmobile.
That was her maiden name?
That was her maiden name. Of course, she was married to Clyde Dakin, manager of Force Plant. But I would sort the mail when I got to the GM building or wherever we were going, and bring it back and throw away the junk mail, get the others to her, and so forth. And I'd always have it so she could kind of go through it. And we had a very, very wonderful time. After about 3 years, there was an opening in Mr. Griffin's office. And there was also an opening in Mr. Goosen's office in purchasing. And I was asked if I wanted either one of those because I had hired in at this job with the idea that I would be transferred at a later date. I turned them both down.
Really?
Oh, yes.
Oh, my goodness.
Because I enjoyed my work, and Mr. Skinner said he had no objection to me leaving because if I could advance myself,
Sure.
it's all for it. And but then after I turned it down, he told me he was glad I did because he said we felt we could get a lot of things done together. And,
Well, the war was going on now, wasn't it?
That's right.
You were in the war, so we weren't making any cars.
No, we quit making cars in 1942.
Okay.
And we didn't start again until 46 model.
So during the war, was he still making runs back and forth like
Oh, we were making, there was 35-mile-an-hour speed limit during that time.
Oh, really?
We had to drive 90 and 95. We only got caught a couple times, and there was some hullabaloo about it, but when it was found out what we were trying to do, I suppose there was a lot of people driving 35 that didn't appreciate us going by them at that speed.
I can imagine that.
Uh,
Did you ever have a car failure somewhere along the way?
No, we had pretty good luck. He trusted me to take care. We had 2 cars at that time when the war started. I was supposed to go in the war. I had some different things that I was to look over and see which one I wanted to go into. I was thinking of the Navy.
All right.
Because I tried to get in the Navy at the time, younger. And they turned me down at that time for a little minor thing, but I'm sure they would have taken me then. But I did have some problems, still do, physical problems. That kept me out for a while, and about the time that I was to go in, the war was getting along pretty well. And Oldsmobile asked for an exemption for me.
Oh, they did. Okay. And you were
because
still.
they felt that at that time too, Mr. Skinner was requested to go to Washington, and he worked in Washington for Charles Wilson, who was the head of defense
Department.
Defense,
Perhaps,
I think,
yeah.
or some part of the war effort. And he worked there. I don't know how many months it was, but David Ralston took over as general manager while he was gone.
Okay.
And I drove Mr. Ralston.
Oh, okay.
And it was very, very different. I liked Mr. Ralston very much. He was a nice man, but we drove 35 miles an hour and didn't get anything accomplished. And if we left for the airport, we were always there 3/4 an hour ahead, half an hour ahead of time.
Okay.
Where Mr. Skinner, we pulled in when they were pulling up the door.
Right on time.
Right on time. At one time during the war, we had a parade in Lansing. General Eisenhower was here, General Clay, and there was many generals, and we paraded up Michigan Avenue to the Capitol. And I was driving in the front car, and Douglas MacArthur was here. And I meant Eisenhower, it was Douglas MacArthur.
Okay. All right.
Take that back. But there was such a jam of people that when I got to the end of Michigan Avenue, I couldn't see where the curb was for the Capitol. I mean, to where to stop.
Yeah.
I mean, people just kept moving ahead of the car.
Yeah.
And finally, I saw someone stumble backwards, and that's the only reason I knew the curb was there.
You arrived.
Just solid mass of people. They're blocked. But one time we went to the proving ground very often.
Okay.
And I was usually make the proving ground in 45 minutes. That was in Melford.
What was going on at the proving ground at that time?
Tank destroyer equipment, shells, and they had a lot of their meetings, the General Motors
Oh.
meetings at proving grounds.
All right.
They would have a lot of their directors' meetings, board meetings,
Okay.
and mostly war effort
Mhm.
meetings. Buick and Chevrolet and the different divisions would be there. Mr. Ragsdale was head of the tank destroyer program at Buick. And one time we had General Clay, Lucius Clay, down there. And Mr. Ragsdale was going to take him for a ride in a tank. So Mr. General Clay got on one side, Mr. Ragsdale on the other. And we saw them coming down through there. You understand that none of the general managers could drive at the proving grounds. They had to have a qualified driver.
Okay.
And you had to be approved
All right.
to drive the track or any part of the proving ground. So the general managers would always ride down in the bus to the track and things with their everything, and we went down in the cars ourselves. But all at once we saw General Clay waving his arms, and an oil line had broken in his side of the tank and was spewing oil all over it. And he had a meeting in Detroit on Cass Avenue, and I really don't remember the name of the building, but he had to talk there. He had to talk, and Mr. Skinner was going down with him. We had the flags, the general flags, and everything on our 98. And when he got saturated with oil, they found us a lieutenant and changed clothes up in the men's room.
Stole his clothes.
Stole his clothes. And he said, Mr. Skinner said, Art, we got 45 minutes and the general is going to be speaking. 45 minutes, past 7. So I put her at the floor. And I pulled up the street and they both jumped out and ran in. And when General Clay came out, he says, Art, you timed it pretty close. He said, they were just announcing me when we went in.
Is that right? Wow.
He was a wonderful man, General Clay. I just had the fondest memories of him right now, and of Mr. Skinner. They were two gentlemen. General Clay would come to Lansing to speak once in a while at some club, they would have.
Sure.
I would just like to say Rotary or something like that. I don't know what it was. But he would always, I was not driving at that time. I was working in engineering.
Mm-hmm.
And he would always ask for me to drive when he's here, take him to Detroit.
Yeah, that's nice.
I drove a lot of people during that time. Jimmy Dorsey and what's his name?
Tommy?
Tommy Dorsey
Yeah.
and Jimmy Dorsey were up here for a program. And they had to go to Canada to get the plane. Couldn't get it out of the United States.
Oh.
So they were running short of time, and they just called me up and says, we need you to drive. Dorsey's got to be in Canada at a certain time because they have an engagement tonight, wherever they were going. And so we had to move that right along too, and I got them over to Windsor Airport. Didn't have any trouble through customs or anything.
Yeah.
So they knew who they were.
Yeah.
And get to Windsor Airport, and Tommy Dorsey shook hands with me, and I felt something in my hand, a $20 bill.
How about that?
Yeah. And thanked me very much for getting there and so forth. But
That's just great. Great.
can you shut it off? Whenever I was on vacation, Mr. Skinner always had another driver, but he let the driver sitting the right-hand side of the seat. He drove.
Really?
And then they would go at the airport, and the driver would bring the car back.
I'll stare.
He would never He just didn't let the fellow drive.
Huh.
That was, I don't know. I guess we got so patterned to each other the way that we did things that I only got lost once. And that was, I took a wrong turn going through the back roads behind Brighton. We took a back road through there to the proving grounds. And I made a wrong turn and got down there a ways. All they said was, I think we better go back and start over again. And, but it was usually a very close time schedule we had. That's how you got so much accomplished. I mean, there's no wasted time.
Did you talk in the car while you were traveling at all, or was it just mostly all business?
It was all business for him, mostly. If we were coming back from Detroit at night or something like that, or Akron, Ohio, or wherever it happened to be, Saginaw, he would talk then. But going down, if it was light, he was working. We had usually cars that we were experimenting with. He would get the car the first thing to drive and try. That was happened when the rocket engine came out. We had one of the first ones. And he asked me to, the engineering, of course, gave him all the information, but he asked me to run a test special for him. I'd gotten promoted a little at that time. They made a different classification for me. They called me a mechanical technician. And they, Bill Mahoney resurrected the classification because it wasn't listed in General Motors.
Well, it hadn't been used.
It hadn't been used, but since I understand it has. So it meant a promotion for me, and it let me in on a lot of the work on automobiles for him. So when we came out with the rocket engine, I ran some tests down there that I thought were for me and him. And we were the only ones that had that information. And I don't know whether engineering ever knew it. I'm sure they did. Because
what was the reason for his different tests, so to speak?
He wanted it from the horse's mouth.
From a real driver, so to speak.
Yeah, from a real driver and somebody telling me absolute truth, whether it was good or no good or bad or good.
How was it?
And if I said it was no good, I told him. And everybody else, I shouldn't say this, but a lot of people. Jim, you've been in it long enough, you know.
I know.
Try to make it look good. But I put it the way it was. Along about, in the later 40s, I think for 1948, we had the first in-car telephone. That was put in by the telephone company. They wanted him to try it.
A radio telephone?
Yes, that was one of the first ones. I think along about 1949, I believe that's about the time. Saginaw Steering Gear sent a Cadillac down to us with the first power steering unit. And we drove that for 2 or 3 weeks. And then I would usually evaluate these things, what I thought. And all in all, it was 10 and a half years of the best time of my life at Oldsmobile. It was hard work. It was long hours. It was very nerve-wracking because of the speeds we were driving. But I thought of another thing now about the time we opened up the windshields. The windshield used to be quite narrow. Then we raised the windshield, made it wider. That opened up a Pandora's box because we got received lots and lots of letters, people complaining of the sun getting in their eye. They couldn't drive. So we came out with a cadet visor.
I remember those.
And the first cadet visor that was put on the car was put on at engineering. I worked quite a bit at engineering with them and things too. And I never had any problems. I mean, they always accepted me and my input. I didn't get into the high stuff, you know what I'm talking about.
You had a unique position.
Lower level. And they put a cadet visor on and we went to the proving grounds. And all the drivers were there, of course. Mr. Skinner, whenever we left the proving grounds, I always wanted to run the track, high-speed track a couple of times.
Okay.
And going into the East Super, you had to be doing 85 in order to hold it up, and preferably 90 to get the top and hold it. And I started in on the track and time along the car up on the West Super and on the north side. And I was doing about 85, 90 when I hit the pad, went into the dome, the top. Jim, I couldn't see a thing. The cadet visor was set so low, I was blanked out. I was blind.
Really?
Blind.
Oh.
The only way I steered around was the rails on the top of that track. I looked out and watched the rails. And I didn't dare drop it down because you didn't dare drop out of that line once you're up there.
Yeah.
Because there may be a car right on your right rear fender
yeah.
the 80 mile an hour, 70 mile an hour line. So you never did that. You never dropped down until you come out on the straightaway. And he said, well, we got a problem before we ever got around there. He didn't know whether we were going to make it or not. And I just kept looking out. I got down like that. Got her back in the straightaway.
What did it do? Push it down?
It was set so low that when I'm going around the road that's up here, I'm looking into this. And I can't even see the bladder. All I see is blank. And head for the garage, he said. Went up to the garage and he called engineering right away. And then we had a measurement. And I don't recall, but it seems what comes to my mind is 13 or 14 inches from the bottom of the cadet visor to the top of the hood.
Oh, yeah.
That gave us clearance when we went down hills, up hills.
So you could always see.
And around the track that you could see. And then we ran into a problem with cadet visors because people couldn't see the traffic lights.
Okay.
So we had a little prism that we hooked down the side of the windshield, on the side of the cadet visor. And then you looked in the prism, that's what I call it, and I guess that's what it was.
Yeah, sure. Red
and green lights, yellow. Check that way. So these are some things that I hadn't think of right now. We I don't know. We had maybe 2 or 3, I guess you'd call them close encounters. I would now, I'd be scared to death, but at that time it wasn't. Do you ever recall coming out of Brighton, coming toward Lansing, there was a wide sweeping curve, about a half a mile north there. There's an alfalfa field on the right-hand side and quite a drop off. And this fellow was coming down from the other side, other way, head on toward us, real fast. And I don't know whether they were racing or what, and the one bumped the other one, and he got on his side. He was sliding on the pavement. I had no place to go except the alfalfa field, which I did, because I never believed in head-on crashes.
Oh, no.
Anything but that.
Anything's better, yeah.
So we took the alfalfa field, and it was quite a bumpy ride down through there. Banging our heads and things. Got back on the road, and I mean, I just didn't affect me too much.
Skinner was with you?
Yeah. And he never said, he says, well, he said you made the right move there. Another time we were coming back from Detroit, and they have these little light markers for the side of the road with reflectors. Yeah. And I don't know, maybe they still have them. Yes, on some roads anyway. And there was a 3-lane road, and there was people coming toward us in a car, and there was a big bus right behind this car. And I don't know whether the bus didn't see us or what, but he pulled right out in that middle lane. And when he pulled out the middle lane, this fellow in front of him cut right out in front of him, the bus. So he had no place to go except my lane. So I took the shoulder in the ditch, and I got 5 of those markers before I could ever recover. And they're quite a ways apart.
Yeah, they sure are.
But I laid those right flat.
Yeah.
And a few things like that.
I can imagine, and all that running.
We never, I think that's why he trusted my driver. And I don't want to be bragging here, but if you have had quite a bit of experience driving like that, you can. Also, I still do it to this day. When I see a traffic light, I count to it. I mean, I plan on that light being green when I get to it. Instead of driving up there 50 miles an hour and then slamming on your brakes. If someone's riding in the car or reading, it's can't do it. So I would apply the brakes pretty carefully. When Mr. Skinner got transferred to Detroit, he called me up and to his office, and he said that he didn't need my services down in Detroit because they had garage door.
Back on.
They had drivers in Detroit that could drive the executives down there. He called me up to the office and told me that he didn't need my services, but he said, I'm sure that the years that you've been around here, you'll find a job around here. And he said, I knew you wouldn't want me to get you a job. And I said, that's right. I said, I don't ever said that you put me in a job that I wasn't qualified for or didn't get myself. He says, I knew you'd want it that way. So before the day was over, Lowell Kinney called me from engineering and said they were looking for someone just like myself to do a job that they'd been trying to find someone to do, and that was to keep the test cars up to specs. In other words, if a fellow go out to drive a transmission, there wouldn't be brakes in the car, and they were having some real bad problems there. So I worked for Jim Lewis and took my orders from Vern Yellow.
Oh, okay.
And I would take a car out, drive it, and if it needed transmission work, I would order that. If it needed brakes, I would order that. Of course, these are all test cars. There had to be records kept of them. And we tried to get the cars back in the fleet where if you went out to test brakes, you had brakes, and if you went out to test transmission, it would shift. And I've changed a lot of TV rods out on the highway at that time. I had the pins. I carried a little kit with me, tools, anything fixed like that. Tires were a big thing. They were driving tires that were ready to blow out.
Oh, yeah.
And I worked at it about 3 months, and Jim Lewis called me up to the office and said that he really appreciated what I'd done with the test fleet. He said, he said, I don't see how you got it up that quick. I said I had good cooperation with Vern Yellen.
This would have been what, like 1950 or 51?
That was 51, I believe.
Okay.
51 or 52.
Okay.
And so I had that job very long, and I liked it very much. And when they started quality control, Mr. Walton started quality control. He made George Ritz, engineer, in charge of the program of standards engineering as far as production was concerned. George had the letter in his pocket, which he showed to everyone, saying that he could take anyone he wanted to out of the organization for quality control. One morning he called me down there and he said, at the garage, and he said, you're going to be working for me from now on. I said, I haven't had anyone tell me differently, though. He says, well, tomorrow you'll be working for me. So I checked with my boss, and he said that was true. But he said, I hadn't called you yet because he says, I wanted to see if I could keep you on the job around. But I went to work for George. Along about the time Mr. Skinner left, we were having some real quality problems, real problems. We were coming back one night from Detroit, and I guess I say things just the way I feel to anybody. I don't care who it is. And I did to Mr. Skinner, and I think that's why he appreciated talking with me. we were coming back and we're coasting along a pretty good clip, about 12:30 night. And he said, "That's sure a wonderful car, isn't it, Art?" I said, "Sure is." And I could have stopped right there, but I said, "It's too bad they aren't all this way."
Uh-oh.
And I opened a can of worms. He said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, engineering takes your car and goes over before they turn it over to us." And I said, "The people getting the cars out in the field are not getting this." I said, "They're getting a lot of problems that we know of. Service is telling, and other people, and the dealers are telling that I happen to know." And he said, "How do we correct it?" And I thought it was kind of odd, him asking me how to correct it. But I said, "I think one way of correcting it is for you to drive a production car home every night."
Oh, interesting.
And I said, "I can pick up a production car from Cunningham or shipping, and I won't tell them which car I want beforehand, and or nobody will know what we get beforehand. I'll just go and pick one up. I'll let the tires down, put some gas in it. That's all I'm going to do." He said, "I think that's a good idea." And I said, "Of course, when we go out of town, we'll drive our regular cars." Right. So the first day I picked one up, I got as far as the paint plant from shipping and quit. I was alone. And the chief inspector came along and said, "I'll get you another car." I said, "No, this one's got a dead coil. Let's put a coil on this one." George Linton's place is right up above. So we went up there and one of the mechanics came down, stuck a coil on it. I went over to the garage, let the tires down, put some gas in it. We didn't put mats in or anything. And we started home, and it was raining.
Now you're driving?
I always drove him home every night.
All right.
Except weekends. He drove himself weekends, but we had two cars. And my car sat in the lot for months at a time. Plant protection was always checking to see when I was going to move it. And Mr. Skinner said that as long as I was driving so late at night, he said I could drive a company car. So I took my car home. Well, anyway, I got this car and we started out, it's raining, and we got as far as Pine Street to make a right turn. He lived in East Lansing, Wild.
Yeah.
And one windshield wiper flew this way to the left and the other one flew that way.
My Lord.
At that time, we were having wiper blades flying off like mad. So I snuck him home and we were turning left off from Grand River on Wildwood and right front door flew open. And if I wouldn't have grabbed him, he'd been out in the street.
Oh, my Lord.
This is real. We had real problems. So the next morning, he said, pick me up at 8 o'clock. He wasn't happy, I knew it.
I can imagine.
We always took a tour of the plant every morning before we went in the office.
Okay.
We'd go over, maybe I'd stop, I'd go in Pine Street Gate. That's what it was.
Yeah.
Pine Street Gate.
Or Elm, I don't know which end.
No, Pine Street.
You were going to the one in the middle.
Mount Elm.
Yeah. Okay.
We went to Pine and we'd go up by the production paint plant up in there.
Yeah.
And he would walk through every morning. Sometimes he'd walk through the mortar plant. And he had good relations with the people on the line. They would all speak and everything.
Yeah.
Had very good relations. I pulled in the garage and he went upstairs and he wasn't up there 5 minutes. I saw a bunch of people coming through Elm Street Gate and a bunch of people coming from engineering. And one of the fellows wouldn't speak to me for months.
Oh, really?
But you know, we got to correct it.
Yeah. I bet you
We
did.
drove cars and it wasn't 2 weeks, Jim, but what quality started coming right up. And we would drive cars, we drove cars home for all the time he was there after that, every night until he left and went to Detroit.
Isn't that interesting?
And I could just see the quality coming back. I mean, so
Well,
much better.
Why was the problem occurring out there, Art? Just lack of interest or?
No, I don't think, I think it was lack of direction, supervision. maybe I shouldn't say this, but
Well, that's probably right.
otherwise, how did it correct itself in a couple of weeks?
Yeah.
But we did that all the time that he was there until he left.
And Skinner always went on in the plant every morning.
Every morning, except if he had a special meeting
Yeah.
or something like that. There was maybe one morning a week when he had a meeting at 8 o'clock, but he was
Okay.
always in at 8. And I'd pick him up around 7:30.
Uh-huh.
And
He would walk around in the plant
Oh, yeah.
and meet you back at the car.
I knew where to come out the other side.
Uh-huh.
He'd meet me on the other side of the plant.
Uh-huh.
At that time, I was building 32, what was 65?
75.
75.
Uh-huh. Where's the car assembly plant?
Yes, right.
Yeah.
And and then when we had the old plant over there.
16, up in 16A and B and 20
Yeah,
in that
right,
area. Yeah.
But I usually knew where to park on the other side, come out. But every morning that, unless he had something special or we were going out of town.
And he wouldn't take people with him, he would
No,
just go by
never,
himself.
Never, all alone.
Interesting.
And he found a lot of things. He was always looking to see what was going on. So when some of the management was telling him what was going on over there, they better not be lying.
Because he would know better.
He knew better. In fact, one big man left Oldsmobile for that reason. In fact, two of them did. I don't think I should say who they are.
That's okay.
But he would not stand anyone lying to him. I went to, do you want me, or I went from then on?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Then I worked on quality control, and there were 5 of us running quality control, 5 people out of standards engineering running quality control. And I was the end of the line outdoors for standards engineering and checking cars.
Okay.
And writing up cars that weren't up to standards.
So you were just out there just watching them as they came along, huh?
Right. Just before shipping.
Mm-hmm.
And got a complaint from the head of production assembly that I shouldn't be working out there because it wasn't in that department. And Tom Downey came over, who was the works manager at the time. And I always had good relations with Tom Downey. And he said he wanted to see me and went over there. And he says, well, he says, if they don't want to do it your way, he says, let's do it their way. He says, I'll make them put an inspector out there and the inspector work for you. And you tell him to take the stickers off.
Okay.
And that settled that right there.
Uh-huh.
Things like this made quality get better.
Yeah.
And I worked a lot of weekends where we had 150, 200 cars out there. We were out there trying to find out how we could do it.
What were the kinds of things that you were finding?
That time we were using Carter carburetors.
Okay.
A lot of them. Floats would stick. They'd flood. They'd do everything.
Mm-hmm.
And George Drake and I went over one time. George had engine group. And Dick Steele had body and 5 of us had different things out of engineering. And George and I went over and George says, I don't know how we get the carburetor's attention on this. I said, let's each take a ball peen hammer, start breaking some floats. I said, that'll change things. He said, do you think we should? I said, I'm gonna.
Start shipping them back.
Carter carburetor was out of business. Oldsmobile right there.
Uh-huh.
And Rochester, with what was going on, took over.
Yeah.
But that was the way you had to deal with some of these things. Then I worked on that until 1955, I think it was.
Yeah.
And Mr. Wolfram put out a thing where anyone that hadn't worked 5 years in engineering had to select other employment.
Really? Okay.
And I was 4 years. I didn't have enough time, so
it was kind of like a layoff.
it was a layoff. And he told me that. I went back to the office and I got a call from Elmer Cole, head of service department, and said he'd like to have me come over and see me because he heard I was out of a job. So I went over and he had my airplane tickets already for St. Louis, Missouri, laying there at the table. That I was going out as a service rep, St. Louis zone.
Oh,
They were having a lot of problems in St. Louis zone, I found out afterwards. And he had the tickets and he said, you can have your wife come down. You go down Thursday, and he said you come back this weekend, and then your family can go down and try and find a home. And my son's in GMI at the time, ready to go.
Yeah.
Jerry was ready to, and
Yeah.
Bob wasn't. And I told him I didn't think I was interested. And because my son was in GMI, and it was quite important to me that they got an education, and I couldn't afford to give them a college education, pay for it. And this is, they both had top A marks out of Sexton. It was easy to get in. And he said, I don't think you should turn it down because it might be doing something in your future at Oldsmobile. I says, I worked before I came. That's all I can tell you, Homer. I know him quite well. He said, they called me back next day and said, Mr. Wolfram, I talked to you. I drove for Mr. Wolfram after Mr. Skinner left. About 3 weeks. 3 weeks. I didn't care the way he wanted a man like me. He didn't care about me. So he got his own drag. Okay. I had an opportunity to go in inspection or production, or go back and work in the garage as a driver. And I talked to my wife, and my wife says, well, we don't need to go to St. Louis. I said, I agree. Well, I can find a job someplace. And so Mr. Wolfram, I went up to see him. And he's very nice about it. He says, Art, you're turning down a big opportunity right at this stage in the automobile business. He said, you've got the experience. He said, you could go out, and I said, you've got the zone there as a service rep. And he says, I can almost guarantee you'd be a zone service manager within 3 years. Well, there wasn't anything in writing.
Right. All talk.
All talk.
Yeah.
And I've been through this before. Yeah. So I said, I'm going back driving. So I drove for G.R. Jones and the people down there in the garage, which was sales manager at the time. And I drove whoever it was.
But you didn't drive for Wolfram?
Didn't drive for Wolfram. Okay. John Essenberg.
Oh, yeah. All right.
Mr. Wolfram didn't want me to have any input. He wanted me to be a chauffeur. And I had graduated from being a chauffeur when I worked for Mr. Skinner. I wanted to be a part of the program.
Sure.
And he let me be a part of the program. Then I went back to driving, and I enjoyed it about a year, I guess. And Mr. Dobbs called me up and said that they were going to thinking of opening a service garage for the service department. Student training, GMI training, engineers. And that he wanted me to take it over. Okay. And he said, Art, don't turn it down again because you may not get away. I took that job, worked there till 1964.
Now, where was that at that?
That was in building 68.
Okay, 68.
Yeah, back to 68. I was working for Bill Buxton, one of my second favorite bosses.
All right.
Of all time.
Yeah.
John Elvis I liked very much when he was in engineering. My bigger boss. Pete Estes was my big boss
Oh,
in
yeah.
engineering.
Yeah.
And I'd like to go back and say something about Pete Estes. Um, I was on the end of the line one time when I was over on that job. Actually, Pete was my big boss over Elvis and
Yeah,
Ritz.
sure.
And they had a bunch of foundation boards, you know, and the lining is in the trunk, that cardboard deal.
Yeah.
And they were taking a hammer and bending those clips up and missing and driving a hole in them and everything. And they had about 150 cars out there with those foundation boards rigged that I'd seen go through the gate. And I got a lot of help from the shippers and stuff because the shippers are getting these complaints.
Yeah.
Stuff Sober and C&J were getting a lot of complaints when they delivered the car.
Yeah.
So they're more than welcome to tell me about problems they got. And so I said, these cars can't be shipped until they're fixed, placed. Can't do it. I said, well, they're not going to go out the gate without a sticker. That's all I got to say, because they want my protection. I'll let them out.
Yeah.
And so I went back to the office, and Duke Osborne was knocked down. I also got a lot of fun, like, you know,
Yeah.
Duke and I guess Duke didn't feel I should be over there doing this. Mike was told that I was going to be over there. And Mike and I got along. And I went back to engineering, and I thought, well, I better go up and tell Elvis or Estes about this, because I think there's going to be a stink about it. Because they were quite adamant about changing any of those.
Sure.
So I'm up in Pete Estes' office, and the phone rings. And it's Mike Meno or Duke, I don't know which one. I don't remember which one. It's one of them. And Pete's sitting there listening. And he says, well, isn't Kapp over there turning those down? And he said, yes. Pete hung the phone up.
Uh-oh.
Wouldn't talk anymore about it.
Really?
So that's the kind of, when Pete Estes was made head of General Motors,
Yeah.
I figured, now we got a man to do something.
Uh-huh.
He backed you up 100%. You have to have that if you're in that type of. But anyway, up to the garage, I enjoyed that work.
Now that had never happened. That never existed prior to that. Is
No.
that right? Uh-huh.
You know, somebody was always letting things go, and I didn't let things go.
Yeah.
But when Mr. Skinner left to go to Detroit, he had 2 or 3 different jobs. When Hydromatic burned,
Yeah.
they called on him to handle getting it done. And many people told me, and people that I knew at Hydromatic said, there's only one man could have got that started as fast as he did, and that was Mr. Skinner.
Hmm.
He said he was there night and day. And he said he was an organizer. You see, Bill Mahoney had a little job when he started there. Griffin had a small job when he started there.
Yeah.
A lot of these people, older, settled in people, the
Yeah.
Oldsmobile, just had mediocre jobs until Mr. Skinner got there. And then they started getting boosted up to where they should be, because they were qualified to do the job.
Sure.
But he made executives out of it instead of managers.
Yeah.
When he left General Motors, he was the head of chairman of the board of aerospace, $1 a year job.
Yeah.
He, John Glenn and all those people were under him.
Mhm.
He did a terrific job in aerospace, and Jimmy Doolittle was his assistant.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
But General Clay, he was living in Cape Cod at that time.
Yeah.
General Clay was there. And it just was a wonderful time.
Mhm.
Mr. Skinner, when he got ill, or before that, he had I think it was a 1964 tornado. No, it wasn't 64 because the tornadoes went. 68 tornado because he had a 66, one of the first
Yeah.
ones, down at the cave. And he ordered this car, 68, and he told him that he wanted me to deliver down to the cave, my wife.
Uh-huh.
So Catherine and I took off with the car. I checked it over pretty thoroughly before we left.
Yeah.
And he was having trouble with his 66 of going over a bump and very dangerous. Dive off the road, you know.
Oh.
The Boston Zone has been in on it, I don't know how many times. And they called and wanted to know if I could take it down, and also that he was having trouble with his 66. I was to drive it back. That what it was doing, and I found out that if you didn't have level tie rods and relay rods on that thing, that when it went over a bump, that's what it would do.
Steer.
It would steer it down. So I called the Boston Zone, and they said, well, they hadn't checked that. I said, well, I can get it home all right. So we drove down, and when we got there at Cape Cod, the butler was there, and he told us that we were going to the guest house and took our things in. The guest house, Jim, was about like my house.
Oh, I can imagine, yeah.
They invited us over for dinner that night. And that was just a wonderful. And after I was there 3 days, Mr. Skinner and I took walks. We were beyond the employer-employee stage at that time. We were friends. And we took walks each day. We were there. And the third day, I said, well, I think we're going to head for home tomorrow. Oh, I wish you wouldn't. I said, well, I know how visitors are. I said, 3 days is enough. So we came back, and then I hadn't seen him again until he became ill. And he had a stroke. And he would have times he was, you know, out of his mind, like people who with strokes.
When you have funny things happen.
And he kept asking for me. And the family called me and asked me if I would go down. That he kept talking about this car that was having problems with. He'd get on this subject, you know.
Yeah.
And it was very sad.
Oh, yeah.
And
feel bad about those things.
So I went down, I flew down there, and I had lunch. I stayed, I think, 3 or 4 days at a motel, and the beautiful nursing home. Oh, beautiful. At Orleans, the Cape.
Yeah.
And the nurse would bring my lunch up. We'd have lunch together and so forth.
Yeah.
He was in bed most of the time at that time.
Yeah, that's a shame.
When I left there, it was very sad for both of us.
Yeah. Just think back to all the things he had done.
We just had, I just always figured he was my best friend in life.
That's neat.
And I guess he figured I was a good friend because he never invited anybody else down to the cave.
Oh, that's such great.
In fact, he wanted me to stay down there a while. He said, your wife can come down, stay in the. I said, no, that I knew maybe he was being kind in saying that. But General Clay, he gave me one of his books and autographed it for me and so forth. General Clay was just like Mr. Skinner, very fine gentleman.
Tell me about the Model Garage a little bit, what you did up there. We didn't talk about that much.
This wasn't the Model Garage. I was in the service.
I mean, the service garage.
The service garage, at the time, Bill Buxton felt that he had to have people. There was still a shortage of service people, trained service people, because we had no way of training them other than we'd hire mechanics out of dealerships, you know, and they were strictly mechanics.
Yeah.
They didn't know paperwork and things.
Right.
Some of them did, some of them didn't. Anyway, he felt that he would like to have some engineer trained students out there as service reps.
Right.
And this is the reason they set up the service garage up there.
All right.
We would have almost 3 to 4 students each month. And some of them were going on to other fields, you know, and wouldn't specialize with us. And some of them, they had that choice.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to make it interesting for them so that we would get a lot of people staying in the service department.
Sure.
Bill Buxton pretty much gave me a free hand of setting it up. We had fine ventilation system, good hoists, fine tools. And after I found a young man that was interested in service, I would try and put him on a specialty deal every month that he was there. 1 month, he would work on transmissions. Next month, maybe engines, cooling systems, air conditioning, wheels and tires, axles, thing. I split that up about 5 different groups, and they would specialize in this. And Ivan Stebbins, who is now having a pretty good job at Oldsmobile, I had lunch with him a month ago. Was my first student.
How about that?
Yeah, and Bob Nelp was one of the students. Bill Benjamin, who's in the Boston City. And they're all very fine young men, because they had an education enough to be able to write reports. We had reports every month when they had to be specialized and write a report in this. And I sent a copy of it to Buxton and Oxendale. And they thought so much of the program that they wanted to continue it.
This is a recording of Arthur O. Kapp of 2224 Bel Air Drive in Lansing, Michigan. The recording was made by Jim Walkinshaw at the Oldsmobile History Center on May 8, 1989. This is tape number 2 of 2 tapes.
Each one of these students that specialized seemed to take an interest in the coming months when he would be able to work on engine or some other part of the automobile. And it developed, what it did is developed a real fine training for him for the future in the field, because he was getting experience. And then after he left the garage, he would go to the office and learn all the paperwork before he was sent to the field. So when he got out in the field, he was a pretty well qualified man to do service reps work.
Did you have other than students there, Art?
I had, eventually I did. Jack Harsich.
Oh, yes.
It got to be too much for me to do. I would go in early in the morning to do my paperwork. I had no secretary or anything, but I had a lot of paperwork, repair orders, things. So I would usually go in about 6 or 6:30 and get most of that done, and before the phone started ringing at 8 o'clock. But I never put any overtime for that. I just figured that was my job, and I guess a lot of people did that back in those days. But once in a while, I would get a fine young man, and he was just not adapted for service work at all. And I had one young man I liked him when he was a sharp young kid. And we were working there one day, and we were going to pull a front pulley in the crank and put a seal in. I said, no, the first thing you want to do is go out and back and get a big piece of cardboard and put down between the radiator and the front pulley. Because I said, if you don't, I says, a lot of things can happen. I said, including injuring yourself. It wasn't a half hour, he come up there with a big towel wrapped around his finger. This pulley had slipped and hit his fins on the finger, cut his finger badly. I sent him down to first aid right away. And Bill Buxton was always asking me about these fellas to give them a rating on them. Well, I usually rated them pretty high because most of them were high.
Yeah.
And I told him, I said, here's a young man that it's just too bad that he can't do service work. But I said, he would be a terrific young man in sales. And he went over through the sales program and he went to Oakland, California and was top man out there.
Mm-hmm.
I guess when he hit the place, he was top. He was just a nice young man. I forget his name. But we had different things like that. We developed a lot of tools, a Burroughs tool and one in Detroit. Can't think of the name of it. I do, I know it too.
These like special service tools?
Special service tools. Ray Billhartz was working on tools and things in the service department. He was an engineer in the service department. And he would come over and we would develop tools. We developed a tool that pulled the front seal.
Mm-hmm.
They
Without taking the crank out.
without taking the crank out. They had I wish I could think of that name of that other company. They had a little 3-finger deal, and the dealers would break these fingers off as fast as you put them in. So we took a cone, sent it down to engineering, and had it made there. Elgin Neff was there ahead of that, and a very good friend of mine too. He did a lot of things for me. And this tapered cone, threaded. And you would thread this in until it expanded the lip of this inner lip of the seal enough so it hold. And then you had a drive threaded bolt that you put right in the end and turned it out and slip it right out and just like nothing. It was quite expensive. And I noticed they quit using it since, but I imagine it's too expensive to build, but it really did the job. We had a lot of things like that.
Was that kind of one of your assignments then?
Yes,
Special tools?
checking on tools.
All those that you'd see in the service manual, the special tools, those kinds of
We
things?
worked on those things, and then we had, they decided to put time study into the garage. So they wanted to hire a man to do time study.
This would be for like the flat rate?
That's
manuals?
flat rate manual, that's right. And I talked with Jack Hartzich. At one time, Jack Hartzich he's a top mechanic. He had gone to the field, and one of the people that just didn't like it out there, his wife didn't like it and things, and he went back on hourly. And I had quite a time getting switched back to salary. But I told Bill Buxton that was the man I wanted, because he could do the job and do it honestly and never regret it. Bill never regretted or anyone, because Jack really turned out fine. But he helped an awful lot in the training of the students too. I had another experience when I was in engineering I'd like to tell you about. That was one time we did checking of production cars then. Had a mechanic in engineering who did my checking, mechanical checks. We would check wheel bearings, brakes, everything, TV linkages, everything on the car. And then we write a report and even send Mr. Wolf a copy of this report, and quite a few people in production and so forth. This helped a lot in getting quality back in the car. I think there was a lot of inspection done that had been skipped before, you know. I think it helped an awful lot. We had at that time, we had trouble finding a place to put the jack in the car. It was always rattling in the trunk. It was always doing this or that. And I don't want this to sound like bragging. I have to tell it like it is.
Yeah, sure.
They had assigned an engineer, Pete Estes assigned an engineer to find a place for this jack. Stable place where it wouldn't rattle, still was handy enough. You could figure out how to use it and so forth. And he'd worked on it for weeks and weeks as engineer. And one day Pete Estes came down through the garage and he says, Art, while you're resting this afternoon, see if you can find a place to put that jack in the trunk and to make it stable. I says, yeah, well, I'm resting. When's that gonna be? But anyway, I took a look at the thing and I said, why not drill a hole through the plate? Put a bolt in the floor pan, put the plate upside down in the hub of the tire.
Does that sound familiar?
I went up to Neff's and I had him drill a 5/8 hole in that plate, and I had him located it. Then I had a welder come down and weld a strap on the floor pan with a hook in, threaded on the other end. Neff made the hook for me. We put a washer on that, it worked fine. So I wrote a report. I think Roger came over, picture, came over and took a picture of it, and I recall, either him or Hyde Markle. And I sent a report through on it, and this engineer wrote a report back and said that the only trouble with it, the jack rattled. I think he was trying to get me down or something. So I wrote another report, and I said, must not have had the nut tight properly. That's that ended that. And, they went with it and used it for a long time. I was in the position I couldn't get suggestions in engineering.
Right.
But Mr. Elfus called me up one day and said, he wanted to talk with me some things. He said, the one thing I want to talk with you about is a raise that you're going to get. So I'm continuing to get that raise for that suggestion in one thing. But that's the way it was. A lot of things, if you suggest or had ideas, you turn them over to somebody.
Sure.
But
Hired up in the garage, where did you get your cars that you worked on?
they were sent in from service. The service garage would have people that needed work done.
These would be like a personal
These
car?
were complaints mostly.
Belong to some person?
Yes, personal cars. Usually some complaint that hadn't been settled in the dealership. And it would come back through customer relations and finally get up to, some of them got up to Mr. Wolfram.
Okay. Would they come from afar?
Some of them. I had a couple cars, and this is one time that I enjoyed in my work too at Oldsmobile, and that was up there on complaints. I had this one car that this lady, they called me, Buxton called me from the office and said, this has gotten up to Mr. Wolfram's office, and these people are going to start suing General Motors. So he said, take a look at it and see what you find. So I made an appointment with this attorney, this lady. She was from Muskegon, had 98, air conditioning. And she had a daughter that was studying opera, and she was getting fumes and ruining the daughter's voice. And so I made an appointment and met them up in front of their driveway. And this lady started telling me everything that I should be or shouldn't be, and every name in the book. And the attorney is trying to calm her down. And she finally, she says, I said, well, we'll take care of it, being polite. And she said, what are you going to do about it? I said, I'm either going to fix it or give you a brand new 98 Oldsmobile. There's nothing more to be said.
Yeah, what can you say?
So I got her number in Muskegon. I said, I'll call you tonight or tomorrow night. You drive this, give her a 98 to loaner. And the Detroit zone has been on this, I don't know how many times. And Jack and I just canceled everything and decided to set out, what do we have to do first? We're getting fumes, so it's got to come from the engine. So first, let's check the dash and see if we've got any openings there. Let's see if the car is an oil burner where it created a lot of fumes. Gas leakage, so forth. And then we decided that everything was fine. Then we decided that maybe we ought to look at the duct underneath the fender. We had an inspection plate about that 8 inches, 10 inches square, with plate with screws on the filler plate.
Okay,
And then you got up into the air ducts there, running from the engine
okay,
compartment up into the air conditioning. And there was a gap on that on the bottom, about 1.5 inches wide open. So it was sucking everything right up through that air duct.
so the plate wasn't sealing the
The plate
hole?
was not sealed. I went right in and called the Detroit zone. They swore that they checked everything. The screws on the filler plate still had the undercoat in.
Mhm.
That's why
Yeah,
you see that a lot of these things you check, it still has the undercoat
Yeah.
on. So I said, well, you must have a different way of getting in and inspecting other than the filler plate. But that's what was put in there. So fixed we got that all fixed up. Had the students wash the car up, polish it up, clean it thoroughly inside, fill it with gas. I called the lady up and I said, your car is ready. And she came down and I said, I'm going to give you my number at home. And I said, I'd like to have you drive it back to Muskegon. And I'd like to have you call me at any time that you find any problem. The next thing I heard, I was smoking cigars at that time. The next thing I heard from the lady, she brought me a box of Antonio Cleopatras. Furnished me with cigars whenever she was in Lansing.
isn't that interesting?
I had 2 or 3 of those experiences. I had one from Detroit that was a bad, but they were all ready to sue.
Yeah,
And I learned that if you smile and treat people nicely, they can only cuss you so long.
that's right. That's exactly
And
right.
but there, I did not blame the lady one bit.
Mhm.
She had a complaint.
Mhm.
If I'd have been me, had been me, I would have complained too.
Sure.
We got it fixed up. She was very nice. Stopped in whenever she came to Lansing. Those are some of the experiences that I really feel good about.
Sure.
You took a nasty thing and
Yeah.
solved it.
Then you got cars then, Art, that just kind of came in, so to speak, off the street? Or
Yeah,
did they
mostly.
prearrange so that you knew they were coming?
Oh, I was prearranged. They were all came in through the service department.
Okay.
I didn't take any cars.
Yeah,
So, and we wrote work orders on them.
Mhm.
If there was a charge, like for plugs and things, material things, we charged for it. I think the worst thing we ever had was air ride, 1958. It about drove me in the insane asylum.
What was wrong with that thing?
That the main thing was wrong with it is cold weather and freeze. Get water and freeze.
Use the pipes up and
And then they would rust out, and then they would get sludge in. And
it's supposed to be a closed system, wasn't it?
oh, it was terrible. Many times down at old building 60, they had about a 4-inch rail for a guardrail in the parking.
Yeah, I remember that.
You get an air ride job with front bumper guards, and the man goes out to, or lady goes out to get their car. These are employees I'm talking about working there. They go to get their car, the bumper guards had dropped over the 4-inch rail, and they couldn't move the car. It lost it. I mean, it wouldn't pump up.
Yeah.
Yes. And the tanks were very dangerous. So those compressors would have problems. Water was the big problem.
Water was a problem.
And then water, you talk water, when it gets cold, it freezes.
Yeah.
So, and this evaporator and so forth, it would freeze solid, so you couldn't pump up anything. So we'd go down there and get a jack and get the thing up off. I had cars coming from New York, Ohio, Illinois, and it was just, and I was working very closely with engineering at that time.
Was there anything we could do with them?
Nothing. They finally decided that they'd put springs in, rear springs.
Convert the whole car back
Convert
to
the
spring?
springs, convert to springs. It was very expensive, but they stood a big show. Oh, it was a terrible expense. In '59, they came out with a manual deal where you could pump up to the front.
Okay.
That didn't, that partially solved the problem. But the only way to solve the problem is getting rid of air ride.
That must have been
It was the most frustrating job. We had a lot of them, Jim, that were frustrating because we were working very, and I'll say this, anytime we called engineering, they would come up and we would go through it. We would go down to engineering work on cars. We had, in the 1959, 98, we had a terrible prop shaft. We went to that's when we first went to a CV joint, constant velocity joint.
Yeah.
To locate that thing properly, which they weren't doing in production. And a man get out on the road and shake you out of the car, it's vibration. So we worked with engineering very closely on that, and we finally decided that using shims and so forth and alignment, we could make it acceptable. But then they finally went into different mounts, everything covered. I worked in this garage until 1964, and then we had some different people in the service department, and it kind of became the point where I couldn't do things experimental wise in testing, following a certain procedure that everyone wanted to dive into things and not do the proper way of finding a problem. Let's do one thing at a time and evaluate it. And so I told Mr. Oxendale that I felt I should move on. And he wouldn't allow that. He said, "You're going to stay here as long as I am." Oh. And he said that Dick Leonard wanted to start a new program over in the office. And at that time, we were in Plant 3 while they were building the new office or administration building. And we were in the upstairs of Plant 3, serviced, and downstairs serviced. So he said that he wanted me to come and work for Dick Leonard. And they had some programs they wanted to set up. So I did, and I got into handling complaints from the field into the service department and recording them. And I can't think of this code they use now on everything. What is it?
Not the UPC?
UPC codes. Okay, yeah. I handled those. I set everything up. This was before we had much in computers in the service department. I set everything up, and then we tried to group it into transmissions and all the components of the automobile. Okay. And have those as headings in our files. So when we, and then the service reps in the field would send these reports in. They would write up this, say what they found wrong, and hopefully if they had some way of correcting it. If they didn't, why they would send in more of them, expect us to find a way in, which we wanted to, of course. This got to be a little overpowering for me because I was getting so much of these. And Dick asked me he told me that they still wanted to go into training of service people. They'd lost that through the garage. Had the
garage gone away?
No, the garage was there, but the people that were running it then didn't. All right. I don't know whether well, I understood they couldn't get any students.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They didn't set a program up that was interesting to the student.
Yeah.
You don't want a student coming in, if he's taking an engineering course, he doesn't want to be a mechanic all his life or something like that. He wants to advance. And a good example is the first one I had.
Sure.
So Dick said, how can we set this up? And I said, well, I would like to get, at that time, they weren't getting GMI students. They were getting mechanics on the dealerships. Right. So I would get, these are all young fellows that had training maybe anywhere from 2 to 5 years in the dealership and had a lot of training, but go back to the point where they couldn't write a report up too much, you know, and explain things.
Good mechanics.
Good mechanics.
Yeah.
So Dick said, I want you to set up something where we can get back into this. So I set it up into I had 5 students. So it asked you to make 5 groups. And then I had each one of these fellows sat right around me like, and I would give, this month, I would give him all his reports came in on transmissions, and he'd have to code those.
Mm-hmm.
We had different complaints on that. Maybe we'd have oil leakage, we'd have slippage, we'd have burned out
Mm-hmm.
clutches. We'd have, each one of those had a code. That all went under transmission. So I had to train these fellows about the codes and, you know, evaluating what the problem was on this report from the service rep, because he'd taken enough time out of his schedule to make out this report to send it in. And then we'd switch around to where they got the same old program I had over there, where they got, you know, all parts of it. And these fellows went to the field, service reps. That was quite interesting because I had a little more contact with engineering then, because they would call us and they'd want to know what's happening to this particular part of the car.
Mm-hmm.
I could go to the files and I could pull out and tell them we've had so many cases that have been written in. We could pretty much tell how serious something was out in the field by the number of reports we were getting in from the service reps, because the dealer was getting on their backs to get fixed.
Yeah.
So they had a reward. It wasn't a bad system at all. It worked out real well. And I was in that until I retired. But then it got to the point up in there where I would have a lot of zone service managers calling me about complaints. And that wasn't the way it was set up.
Why would they be calling you? For a solution?
Yeah,
Oh,
because some of the other people say, look on page 172.
of the service.
It wasn't on set 172. It was a new problem.
Mm-hmm.
I had contact with engineering. So when I'll give you an example. We had John Jacobs was his own service manager in New Jersey. And he had a customer that had a 98 Oldsmobile with a big trailer. And he couldn't back it up. Wouldn't
power.
reverse, no power. So I guess he had a lot of problems with this. So he called me on it, and I went over to engineering and I talked to a couple of people over there. In fact, one of them was Bob Stempel. And they decided that we had the too high a gear ratio fixed.
Oh.
And they told me to try a 293X or 296. We carried 323s mostly.
Okay.
I think it was 293 or 296X. And I shipped him one down to New Jersey. This all takes a lot of time.
Oh, yeah.
And he called me back in a couple days and he said, just the customer's perfectly satisfied. And about that afternoon, I got a call, and it was from New Jersey. And the man says, I'm Mr. So-and-so. I said, do I know you? And he says, probably not. But he says, you sure saved me a lot of problems. He says, I'm the dude that had that axle.
Oh, yeah.
He said, Mr. Kapp, I sure want to thank you. He says, I'm real happy with the car and everything. Things like that made you always feel like you were doing the job.
Yeah.
And I liked that. In fact, I was pretty much into that until I retired.
When did you retire?
71.
So
They put me out on a disability.
Okay.
So I had a year. I was having all kinds of problems. My doctor kept asking me if they gave me something beside a desk job.
Yeah.
I said, no. I said, I've asked for anything beside the desk job. Killing my back and everything.
Oh, gee. Uh-huh.
And one day I was having quite a bit of trouble. I went to him and I told him orthopedics. He says, okay, half hour I was out of Oldsmobile.
Really?
I called Mr. Oxendale and said that I was going on disability.
Yeah.
That was it. But
All right, take me back for just a minute to the air ride thing. Did other divisions other than us have air ride at
Yes,
that time?
yes.
So that wasn't an Oldsmobile developed thing?
no, it wasn't. But I don't think they went into it too much because, as I understand, some of the divisions were afraid of it before they ever started. As you realize, Jim, that Oldsmobile back from early times was pretty much an experimental
Right.
with General Motors.
Right,
Good examples, Hydermatic.
sure,
Some of the others that had the rocket engine.
yep,
And I happen to know, and I'm going to tell this on the tape because it's something about rocket engine. I had Mr. Skinner and O.E. Hunt, who was executive vice president at the time, before the rocket engine came. And in the car, and we were going around proving grounds, track, and they were talking, and I never revealed things that were talked about in the car.
yeah.
But I am going to this time because they're both
Oh,
gone.
they're gone, yeah.
And it pertained to Oldsmobile. They were going to, Mr. Hunt said that Cadillac had the sole use of the new rocket engine. And Mr. Skinner says that is not going to work. Got to have more production on it. It's got to be put to another division, and I want it in Oldsmobile. Those words, exactly. Mr. Hunt says, I don't think I could sell that. Mr. Skinner said, we've experimented with everything else we come through in Oldsmobile. And he says, I think we should have the rocket engine. Before that night, Oldsmobile had the rocket engine. Wouldn't have been for him, we wouldn't have had it.
Yeah,
That's
interesting.
just one of those things.
Yeah,
He was, as I said when I started, as far as I'm concerned, he made Oldsmobile and the people in it. He got everybody to work hard, do their job, and if they did, they got compensated for it.
well, that's great, Art.
I don't know of anything else that I can tell you.
Oh, that's an excellent job. Beautiful job.
I tried to think of most of the things.
Yeah, well, that's great. Well, shut her off.